All right, welcome everyone. This is Chef AJ and I am in Baltimore, Maryland, and I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. David Neubauer. He is a sleep medicine specialist at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm so excited to talk to you, Dr. Neubauer. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here with you. Sleep's a great topic, and I'm happy to talk about it and emphasize how it blends in with all aspects of wellness.
Well, I appreciate that because I really became interested in sleep recently while hearing Dr. Doug Lisle give a lecture about how important it was after he read a book called Why We Sleep. And I bought that book on Audible. I haven't read it yet, but what he said is that sleep is much more important than most of us have given it credit for.
Well, that's for sure. And, we feel the fact that sleep is important because if we don't get enough sleep or good sleep, the consequences the next day are pretty obvious. We feel run down and fatigued and perhaps even sleepy. But scientific research over the past few decades, and more so over the past few years, has emphasized so many ways that sleep is important, not just for our health and for our mental health as well, but for so many aspects of society's diseases. So many of the chronic disorders that we know are due to lifestyle problems, blend in with our sleep problems as well.
Well, why do we sleep? I mean, it seems like every animal I've ever seen sleep, but why do we sleep?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question, and there are a lot of theories about it. I have no doubt that it's a lot of different things that have evolved over time. If you go back to even single-cell organisms, they have rest activity cycles, and so just about any living system has some degree of rest or activity or circadian rhythms that have at least something to do with influencing our propensity for sleeping. So we know that sleep is important acutely because if you stay awake all night long, you're sleepy the next day. We know that a lot of people are simply not getting enough sleep, so they're chronically sleep deprived and maybe dragging through the day as a result of that. But as I mentioned, there are so many other aspects of our physiology that are influenced by sleep, and that research has emphasized these connections. And what's been so interesting for me is this. I've been involved in sleep medicine for several decades now. I became enlightened to the plant-based world later than that, but I have attended lots of conferences and lectures, and I've read a lot of books and followed a lot of online activity. And over again, I'm seeing references to the health benefits of plant-based eating, which all seems very obvious, but I'm sitting in the audience thinking, wait, sleep does the same thing. And so there is tremendous overlap between the problems that evolve as a result of inadequate sleep as there are with people who are sleeping and people who are eating inadequately as well. So lack of sleep causes inflammation, which we know is a problem with people who are following the wrong diets. There are immune consequences. There are all sorts of different metabolic consequences of insufficient sleep. And so what are the big chronic conditions that people suffer from in our society? Well, there are things like obesity and hypertension and diabetes, and sure, we know about the food connections, but there are direct sleep connections as well. So people who are not getting enough sleep or perhaps have poor quality sleep because of a sleep disorder are more likely to have cardiovascular disorders. They're more likely to have strokes and myocardial infarctions and hypertension. Cancer is increased in people who either don't sleep or sleep at the wrong time because of dyssynchrony of circadian rhythms. People who don't sleep enough are more likely to experience greater pain, and if they're on pain medications, they're more likely to be taking more pain medications. People can be studied in laboratories for the degree of pain that they can sustain, like how long you can keep your hand in a bucket of ice water. If you are sleep deprived, then your sensation of pain is much, much worse. The immune system, our grandmothers told us, be sure to get enough sleep or you're going to come down with something. That's absolutely true now. So here's some of the evidence. A study was done and they recruited, I think, something like 164 healthy individuals. And these people were monitored for a few weeks before the study to be able to identify their sleep-wake patterns. They were brought into a hotel, and so they were kind of quarantined. I think it was about 5 days. And all of these subjects were given drops of the rhinovirus in their nose. So, as you'd expect, the vast majority of the individuals, 70-something%, developed an infection, meaning there was evidence of an antibody response or the viruses themselves could be identified. However, only like 26% developed colds, actually had an illness as a result of exposure to that virus. And who were those people that were more likely to get the illness? The ones who were sleeping less, like 6 hours or less. And it was sort of linear after that. The more sleep people were getting in the few weeks before this experiment, the less likely it was that they were going to develop a cold.
Wow, that's fascinating. We actually have a physician watching Dr. Dana Simpler who says that Dr. Neubauer is one of our country's top sleep specialists. So it's such an honor to be able to talk to you.
Well, sleep is really a great field because it affects so many aspects of our lives. And so I have the opportunity to see a lot of people who have different sleep disorders, and it's no surprise for many of them that they have these other sorts of chronic conditions that plague our society. I do my best to nudge people along to healthy eating. None of them come to see me about what they're eating, but I know that their lives, both the quality of their lives, but a lot of their health conditions would be so much better if they were sleeping better and following a better diet. So research has also shown that even sexual satisfaction is improved in those people who get more sleep.
Oh, I sleep about 20 hours a day.
Yeah. There's, how about mortality? People are more likely to die, at least in terms of large epidemiologic studies for those people who are sleeping relatively short periods of time, or really long periods of time as well. So there's kind of a sweet spot for most people sleeping about between 7 and 9 hours most nights. What's worse than dying? Losing your memory, dementia. A lot of evidence there as well, and there's very exciting evidence that's been evolving just over the past few years about the glymphatic system. So we've known about the lymph system throughout the body for a long, long time, but now we appreciate the fact that there is something analogous in the brain, it's called the glymphatic system, and it's sort of a clearance of cerebrospinal fluid. It helps to, with the brain circulation of clearing out byproducts. Our brain is the most active organism in the body, and so there are a lot of byproducts of biochemical activity that need to be swept away, and so this glymphatic system does that. When does it do it primarily? Yes, during sleep, especially during our deeper sleep. So there are some studies, some epidemiologic studies, showing that those people who are sleeping less have a greater risk for developing the beta amyloid plaques, which are one of the key characteristics of Alzheimer's disease. So there's so many different aspects of health and mental health as well that overlap with sleep. And I always emphasize overlapping just as much with following a plant-based diet and getting healthy exercise. And I think
it's 3 legs of a stool.
It is the trifecta of wellness. Now, there are a lot of other things you can do. Meditation is super, and all the things you can do to reduce stress, and yoga, and so many other practices that can blend in. But I think the sleep and the plant-based diet and the exercise really stand together in being so powerful.
It's the keys to the kingdom.
I have so many patients that complain to me as they get older that sleep becomes more elusive. A lot of women after menopause itself interrupting sleep, and then after menopause not sleeping. Can you address why that is, and if there's things people can do as they age to sleep better?
There are a lot of reasons why people tend to sleep worse as they age. However, healthy aging is not inevitably associated with poor sleep. And so you mentioned menopause, and it's true. I see a lot of women who feel that there's been a deterioration in their sleep, either perimenopause or afterwards. And some of the reasons are, as we age, we develop other health problems that may be associated with sleep difficulties. We're more likely to be on medications that potentially can influence sleep. There are it's simply life changes that occur over the several decades as people are aging that can have a negative effect on sleep. Women at menopause catch up with men in terms of their risk for obstructive sleep apnea, which is a very common problem that can undermine sleep quality, that can lead to a lot of daytime fatigue and sleepiness, and oftentimes people are not even aware that they have it, and it's really surprisingly common in the general population. When we think about sleep apnea, we usually think about middle-aged overweight men who snore really loud, and there are a whole lot of them that do have apnea. We have skinny young women who have some sleep apnea as well. So we are always on the lookout for sleep disordered breathing as a possible cause of complaints that people have of unrefreshing sleep and daytime sleepiness.
Yeah. When does somebody know when they should seek out the services of a sleep specialist such as yourself?
I would say if you feel that your sleep is interrupted a lot and it's affecting you during the daytime, well, I think you should have a pretty low threshold of at least getting that evaluated. And the place to start is with a primary care provider who can, try to sort things out. Maybe there are blood studies that would help, screen people for various disorders, and move forward from there, possibly a referral to a sleep disorder center.
I have a question.
Yes.
How does timing of your meals, especially the last meal of the evening, affect sleep quality?
There's been just a wonderful amount of exciting research coming out just over the past few years, some of it with animals, some of it with humans, showing that the timing of our eating has a very important role with regard to our circadian rhythms. Our circadian rhythms influence a lot of different aspects of our physiology that vary throughout the day-night cycle, and so there's a strong influence on sleep as well. We know that the sleep-wake cycle itself is primarily regulated by two different factors. One we call the homeostatic, the other one is the circadian system. And while they're usually nicely synchronized to allow us to sleep for roughly 8 hours at nighttime and be awake for 16 hours during the daytime and evening, they can be dissociated. Jet lag, people doing shift work would be examples there. But under normal circumstances, when somebody has slept reasonably well at nighttime and they get up in the morning, they're not too sleepy because their homeostatic sleep drive was satisfied. So this homeostatic drive is simply the balance of how much sleep and waking occurs. And for whatever reason, as humans, we're driven to want to sleep about a third of the time. But just from that homeostatic perspective, it wouldn't matter when that sleep occurred. For instance, you could sleep for 1 hour and then be awake for 2 hours, and then sleep an hour, be awake for 2 hours, do that around the clock, and you would get enough sleep homeostatically, but obviously that's not what we do. And the reason is because our circadian rhythm is strongly influencing when we sleep. And so while this homeostatic drive determines about how much sleep, it's the circadian rhythm that is optimizing our ability to sleep at nighttime. So we don't go to bed in the evening and sleep all night because we decide, I'll do my sleeping now because there's nothing else going on. Clearly, this is strongly physiologically driven, and the primary influence on our circadian system is light. And it's the photo period, our exposure to morning light through the day, light going down in the evening, and then being in darkness during the nighttime. And our exposure to that light, photons, coming in through our eyes, influencing the retina. There are particular photosensitive cells that have a photochemical reaction. It's a short route back to our suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is where the circadian rhythm is primarily regulated, and then the information is sent out to the whole body. But we now know that it's not a one-way street. We used to think the suprachiasmatic nucleus controls everything. And while it is a very strong influence, there is now known to be feedback from other bodily systems back to the SCN. So to get to the question about eating and the timing of eating, that has a really important role with regard to our circadian system and how we metabolize food. So we used to think that you would eat some food and it would have an effect on you. And you would either gain weight or lose weight depending upon exactly what that food was, like just a simple balance. And we used to think, well, if you eat this stuff that's 3,500 calories, well, that's going to be a pound. And if you eat less over a week or two, 3,500 calories less, well, you're going to lose a pound. And it's just not true anymore, because when you eat has a tremendous effect on how that food is metabolized. And that has a huge influence on our health, a little bit every single day. So we are optimized to best metabolize food when we first get up in the day. And not only what we eat, but when we eat breakfast is really important. And then, a lunch and dinner ultimately later in the day, it's physiologically best to have that last meal relatively small and relatively early. And optimally, having a relatively short period of time between the first meal, which should be the same time every day, and the last meal. Now, some studies show that the perfect range would be like 8 hours, which is really kind of impractical for most people, but 10 hours and a maximum of 12 hours. So breakfast at 7 a.m., dinner finished totally before 7 p.m. would be a whole lot better than a situation where somebody's having a later meal. So optimally, we should be stopping all food intake early in the evening, because everything you're eating later on essentially is poorly metabolized, and it leads us all into becoming a little bit diabetic in the evening. We become insulin insensitive. Our glucose is higher. Our insulin levels go up higher in the evening for the exact same response to food compared to early in the day, where it would be a normal reaction. And so our circadian rhythms are going to be better reinforced by regularity in eating. Physiologically, we're going to be healthier. We're going to be more likely to either lose weight or maintain a steady weight. And we're going to, avoid a lot of the inflammation that goes along with eating food at the wrong time, which is late in the day. So optimally, one should have several hours available of wakefulness after the last meal before going to bed. For instance, if you can do 4 hours, that would be very good.
Wow, terrific. How do these highly addictive drugs that are so common in our society, like caffeine and alcohol, affect sleep?
Oh, well, that's a great question, and that's what we ask everybody who comes in because it's so important. So caffeine is a stimulant, and, years ago, it was pretty easy to address the caffeine question because people, might have some coffee in the morning, they might have some tea, they might have sodas with meals, but that was about it. And as long as you weren't doing that too late in the day, then, it's unlikely that it would cause too much difficulty. And, practical advice for most people, I think, is cutting out caffeine after lunchtime is pretty good, and avoiding it later in the afternoon and certainly in the evening. So the complication of these days is all the energy drinks, which people are thinking, this is a fun beverage that I can have anytime. It'll give me a boost. And some of those have huge amounts of caffeine, like hundreds of milligrams. A regular 12-ounce can of soda, which people shouldn't be drinking anyway, but those might have 30 or 40 or 50 milligrams of caffeine. A cup of coffee might have 150 or 200 or sometimes more, depending on the size and how it's brewed. But some of these energy drinks might have 160 or even into the 300 and 400 milligrams in a single serving. And so people having those late in the day can have a significant trouble with their sleep. Most people tend to stay up too late anyway, and beverages like that just facilitate that, and the whole problem sort of has a domino effect after that, because the lack of sleep causes these other problems during the daytime. So the other part of that was alcohol. So alcohol is really not good for us in any way physiologically, but however, it's pretty popular, but it's certainly not the answer to problems with sleep. It always backfires. People think a nightcap, glass of wine or two will help me fall asleep. It's a bad idea physiologically. It's a bad idea directly with regard to sleep quality. Sure, alcohol is sedating, and when your blood level after drinking it is going up, it's making you kind of sleepy. But then by the middle of the night, when your blood level's coming down, it's activating. And so the net effect is much worse sleep. So we always ask people, caffeine and alcohol, because sometimes there's a simple solution, or at least that can be part of the broader picture of sleep hygiene, all the different behaviors that people can follow to try to optimize their ability to sleep. And we certainly recommend helping people in their lifestyle throughout the day and evening and nighttime, rather than immediately turning to some other solution, whether it's some medication or some other kind of directed therapy.
Right.
Can I bring it back to food for a minute?
Sure.
So for the evening meal, is there any kind of relationship between the type of food that you eat in the evening? I've heard that it's best to have your high protein meal containing beans, for example, earlier in the day, and I find that I personally, if I eat beans for my evening meal, I have a much harder time sleeping than if I eat something more starchy like sweet potatoes or
Squash.
Squash, yeah.
So I think the best answer is what works for an individual. So clearly, we have good advice about the timing, making it early. And I think there just hasn't been much research about the actual components of food. I mean, we know in general, plant-based diet is going to be really good for you, and the diversity of different elements there. Get your greens and beans and your grains and. But what's going to work best for one individual? I don't know if we just have enough guidance right now to make specific recommendations, other than eat according to a good schedule and make good food choices.
And what about, you mentioned the medications, and a lot of my patients want sleeping pills.
Sure.
And I've been hearing recently that there is an association between memory loss if you take sleeping pills on a regular basis, even sleeping pills like Tylenol PM and things like that. Is that true, or what is the science on that right now?
It's definitely true with the people who are taking antihistamines. So diphenhydramine would be the active ingredient for a lot of the over-the-counter sleep aids. There are a few other antihistamines that sometimes are used, and it's clear that there are potential memory effects for those kinds of medications. Interestingly, the medications that are prescribed for people to help prevent and decrease the progression of dementia do exactly the opposite. So it's really rather startling that people would take a medication, known to have some difficulty with their memory, when in fact there's evidence that doing the exact opposite is more beneficial.
Do you mean like
for
Aricept
dementia.
or
Right, those classes of medications, anticholinesterase inhibitors, doing, the opposite of what antihistamines are doing. So there is evidence that antihistamines can be helpful to some extent. They are sedating because histamine itself is a potent stimulating neurotransmitter. So if you're blocking the histamine effect, then that might help promote some sedation, but it's really not a long-term solution. One of the problems that goes along with that is people tend to become tolerant to those effects. And so, say with diphenhydramine, which is very popularly used over the counter, typically people may take 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams. However, because of the tolerance that develops, sometimes people will take a whole lot more. For instance, last week, I saw a young woman who was taking up to 600 milligrams of diphenhydramine in a single night, along with some other medications as well. And you know, clearly, this is not a good idea. And especially in older individuals, it's a bad idea because it can cause, you know, not just confusion, but full-blown delirium in some cases, and a lot of other side effects can go along with them as well. There are a lot of other medications that the FDA has approved for the treatment of insomnia. I want to emphasize that we do a whole lot of other things first before thinking about a medication.
Say, shouldn't sleep medication not be the first line of defense? Because all the people I know that take things like Ambien, they've never been able to get off of them.
So we always think about helping people create a conducive environment for their sleep. We want to address the lifestyle issues, the sleep hygiene issues. So let me talk about some of those. In the daytime, people should be really active. And the more active you are, the greater likelihood is that you're going to sleep better.
Because you'll be tired.
You'll be tired.
So many people don't even exercise.
Right. And be exposed to a lot of light, beginning when you get up for the day and through the day, and then decreased as the evening goes on. So activity and light during the daytime are really, really good ideas. We've talked already about substances, so that's part of sleep hygiene as well, being concerned about caffeine intake and alcohol intake. In the evening, people should sort of wind down with a relaxing routine, not sitting in front of a television or sitting on Twitter for hours and getting all upset about that, or watching TV for the news or the latest politics, which, you know, can be stressful. So you just can't be so busy like that throughout the evening and then turn out your light expecting to right away fall asleep.
With your iPhone in your hand.
That's exactly right. And that brings up the next question about evening light exposure. Now, throughout the house, it's good to be dimming the lights for a few hours as bedtime approaches and transitioning to light bulbs that are less blue in their spectrum. And so with the fancy new LED bulbs that are available, you can easily go on to a big online store and search for, say, sleep LED bulbs. And so these warmer color temperature bulbs, some of them are listed as 2700 Kelvin bulbs. They're reddish, so they have little of the blue light spectrum that tends to be so alerting and actually has a physiological effect on our circadian system. So if somebody's going to be reading in bed, you're much better off doing that with one of these warm light reddish bulbs. Even then, the bulb shouldn't be terribly bright.
And if they're reading a Kindle, should they have the blue light blocking glasses as well?
Right. So electronic screens are very problematic. Many of us use them a whole lot into the evening. And an electronic screen by itself has a lot of blue light in it. And therefore, the blue light is affecting that photochemical reaction that I mentioned earlier, whereas a reddish light is much less likely to do that. And so the operating system on some of the phones and tablets actually have a transition in the evening to a color screen that is more reddish, blocking out the blue. So doing that as much as possible is a good idea. There are some apps. There's one called f.lux that also will change the screen color temperature. It's a good idea not to be sitting in front of a big desktop monitor or close to even a tablet that's really too close to your eyes. You're better off watching a TV that's way across the room where just a little bit of that's going to be filling your retina as opposed to holding a smartphone or a tablet or sitting with a laptop computer still with that screen covering a lot of our retina. So light exposure from electronics is really very, very problematic. The blocking out the blue light is good, but there's still plenty of light, plenty of stimulation, mental stimulation from all of that. I think people are much better off doing something that involves less light and something that they can, put down right away, not being involved in a TV show that's going to keep them awake later. People in general are staying up way too late. If I'm downstairs on my computer and it's 11 p.m. and I'm really active doing something, well, I'm wide awake and alert. If it's 11 p.m. and I'm in bed and the lights are out, I'm going to be falling asleep. So exactly what we're doing, the routines that we follow in the evening have a very strong influence on our propensity to fall asleep. So I spend a lot of time encouraging people to go to bed earlier, decrease lights earlier, get into bed earlier, follow a relaxing routine. Another thing that can help with the sleep hygiene for some people is before getting into bed, going someplace, sitting down with a pad of paper, and having, a little worry time, some idle time to just write down things from the day and what you're thinking about for the next day, because so many of us are so busy, the first moment that we have to think about what's transpired during the day or what we need to worry about for tomorrow is when we've gotten into bed and turned out the light. And that can inhibit the ability to relax and fall asleep. So if you can get some of that out of the way earlier and leaving it somewhere else, so you can get into bed knowing that you've, considered some of those problems or simply plans for the following day.
That's a great tip.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about herbal teas? Are there any that you recommend, or is it not good to drink too close to bed? And also the role of body temperature in sleep.
Well, also because if you are drinking herbal tea, like she suggested, which I think can be very relaxing,
Yeah.
so many people, especially the women I talk to, as they get into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, even without herbal tea,
Right.
they're waking up a couple times a night to pee. What's the solution? No, wear a diaper?
Yeah. Well, so you bring up an important point. I see some patients who tell me that they stop drinking all fluids by 5 p.m., 6
I
p.m.
do it at noon. Seriously.
So I like to point out to people that our brains are mostly water. And sleep is a really important function of our brains. And so you don't want to be deprived of fluids. You don't want to be dehydrated going to bed. So I think people go overboard. So I encourage people to drink in the evening, drink water so your brain is hydrated. And you don't want to, drink a liter right before trying to go to sleep. So you want to try to balance that somewhat. But I think I want to caution people not to go too far in avoiding fluids in the evening. Herbal teas, what we know about time-restricted feeding, that is trying to shift all of our eating, within a relatively short period of time and ending that early in the evening, is that I believe herbal teas are probably okay, but as soon as you have any other nutrient
Calories
in it, anything that the body is going to identify as food, and that would even include a plant-based milk mixed in with it.
What about people that do shift work, that a lot of the nurses and people that have to work at night? Isn't that compromising their health long term, having to do that?
We depend on so many people, first responders, people in hospitals, as you mentioned. There are a lot of folks who society needs to be working through the nighttime. And it's just not friendly for our sleep-wake cycle. It's not friendly for our health. Simply doing shift work increases of the risk of developing cancer.
Wow. Well, I feel bad. Like Dana's daughter is a resident now, and I don't know if it's changed, but at least from what you see on TV, they make them work ridiculous long hours. I mean, doesn't that make people in the medical profession more prone to make a mistake when they're, or anybody in any job, when they're sleep deprived?
There's been a lot of evolution in schedules for people in training, and so, back in the day,
She doesn't suffer like I suffered.
Exactly. So, doctors in training many decades ago had much worse schedules, and so there are laws now about how much sleep deprivation, or at least the work hours, are much friendlier. Even though there are times that people do need to be up through the nighttime and on extended schedules.
How does one even know if they're sleep deprived? Because so many people rely on caffeine. I mean, I've heard that decaf is 25% caffeine and it still has a very long half-life. Since so many people just routinely use these stimulants every day because they're so addicted, how does one even know they're sleep deprived? What are the symptoms? What should we be looking for?
It's a good question because a lot of people do not realize how sleep deprived they are. What they are feeling during the daytime, dragging through the day, they feel is the new normal for them. And that can go on for years and decades. And sometimes people tell me that they realized that they had a problem because circumstances allowed them to get a really good night of sleep. And they were surprised at how good they felt the next day. And it might be vacation that did it, not a stressful vacation, but one where the individual was able to get to sleep earlier and then sleep as long as they wanted to afterwards. Another example that I hear a few times a year is people coming in and telling me how much they look forward to their colonoscopy because it's the best sleep that they have and they feel so good after that. And that makes me think, well, there's really something wrong here. And it might be, that they have some other sleep disorder that hasn't been diagnosed, or there are other lifestyle issues that are undermining their ability to sleep well enough.
You said about having a regular bedtime, getting to bed earlier. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that preferably it should be by 10 p.m. that all that really cool stuff that's supposed to happen happens between 10 and midnight. And if we go to bed late, we're missing out on a lot of that restorative stuff. Is that true?
I know that there are some people who get enough sleep and have all the right types of deep sleep, the different sleep stages that would be considered normal, even though they may go to bed after midnight and sleep 8 to 9 hours after that. But most people don't have that choice, and they need to be up at 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock and are not getting to bed 8 to 9 hours before then. So practically speaking, I encourage people whenever possible to try going to bed a half hour earlier, maybe an hour earlier, and then move it on from there. So there are a lot of people who are sort of stuck on an 11 p.m. bedtime, 11:20, because they want to watch the weather for the next day, as if it would really make any difference.
You can just ask your device what the weather is.
Yeah, well now, then they want to stay up for the opening monologue of whatever their favorite show is after that, and before you know it, it's midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and you really don't need any of that. And so I encourage people to get to bed, 9,
right.
10 o'clock.
The best. They can be taping those shows, by the way.
That's right. Yeah.
Because aren't alarm clocks kind of detrimental in a way? Because if you need an alarm clock to wake up, I have one only when I travel, but otherwise I don't believe in them, because to me, you need to sleep to satiety, not to what the clock is set for.
I agree. Most people really don't oversleep. When our brains are ready for us to wake up, when we're on a regular schedule anyway, and synchronized nicely with the day-night cycle, we wake up on our own. And the crazy thing is the people who have so much trouble getting up that they feel that they need like 5 or 6 alarm clocks. And maybe they've got, some in their smartphone, and they've got a whole bunch of them set, or they've got one across the room, so they're sure to get up. And wow, they're spending an hour or more in disrupted sleep, which is not working very well for them. And they're better off just finding a solution for that final alarm clock that they can sleep up until, rather than this crazy strategy of having poor quality sleep.
The snooze alarm. That's
exactly right.
It's a joke. So a sleep debt, I heard, is not one you can repay. So in other words, these people that are burning the midnight oil all week and then they try to make up for it on the weekend, you can't repay a sleep debt, correct?
So catching up on sleep a little bit in the weekend is better than not.
Right.
And so it's kind of like a moving average. And I totally agree that, way too many people are sleep deprived through the week, and most of those people could get more sleep if they made some compromises and prioritized sleep more. But catching up on sleep on the weekend might help some. However, by going, usually they're staying awake later at nighttime on the weekend as well. So they're not necessarily catching up that more, they're kind of just delaying it. And it keeps us in kind of what's called a social jet lag, which is bad for our physiology as well. And those sort of cycles contribute to these metabolic consequences. Now, it's true that recent lack of sleep should try to be made up to a certain extent. Now, some people tell me, back in their 20s they were doing shift work and they heard you can never make up for that. And it's not like for the whole life you're going to be living with the consequences of that. But certainly within the past week or so, your state right now is influenced not just by the night before, but by a week or two before that.
So many people I know, Dr. Neubauer, even including family members, are overweight or obese, and they have sleep apnea, and they wear the mask.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were to lose weight, could they actually reverse the sleep apnea?
Yeah, so the quick answer is maybe. We think weight loss is really valuable for so many reasons, including improving sleep apnea. Many people have sleep apnea for two reasons: their weight, but also the genetics of their airway. And so we see skinny young women who have bad sleep apnea sometimes just because their airway is more collapsible. And so we always encourage people to lose weight, even recognizing that they may never come off of the CPAP mask.
Let's say somebody's overweight but doesn't have sleep apnea.
Yeah.
How could losing weight help them sleep better? Or does it?
Yeah,
help
well,
you
there
sleep
clearly are associations between weight and poor sleep quality. And much of it goes along with a lot of the kind of problems that people experience with the wrong kind of diet also. There's simply, chronic inflammation that is undermining sleep just as it's undermining a lot of other physiological processes.
What about things like melatonin? Do you recommend that, and if so, what dose?
Melatonin is an evolving story. So I talked earlier about the sort of the interplay between the homeostatic and the circadian rhythm that for all of us is influencing strongly when we're awake and when we're asleep. So we are able to stay awake and active for 16 hours or so into the evening because our circadian system is promoting maximum arousal in the evening, even though we've been awake so long. So in the background, our homeostatic system is building up sleepiness, but it's overpowered in the evening by our circadian arousal. We are all the most awake and alert in the evening than any time throughout the whole 24-hour cycle. So as our bedtime approaches, our endogenous melatonin gradually increases, quieting down that arousal, leaving the homeostatic sleep drive unopposed. And that's why, even though we were wide awake 2 hours earlier, when we get into bed, most of the time we can fall asleep pretty quickly because it's just our homeostatic drive that's getting us off to sleep. What is quieting down that circadian arousal? It's the melatonin that has been released in the evening. Our melatonin levels are very low throughout the daytime, and just within the few hours before bedtime, the melatonin naturally comes up, kind of plateaus through the night, and then comes down after that. So melatonin plays a critical role in the regulation of our sleep-wake cycle. And so since our own melatonin helps facilitate sleep onset, it kind of makes sense that taking some melatonin would be beneficial. And for some people it is. It's more likely to be helpful a few hours before bedtime because it can help to quiet down that arousal. But it's important to understand that melatonin itself is not a sedating compound. It's not like a sleeping pill. So it really is more of a signal to our biological clock. Now, the thing about melatonin that makes it a bit more problematic with very recent research is that melatonin can have a negative effect on our physiological response to food. And so what we really want to do with the timing, and part of the reason that we want meals to end early, is we want to finish processing our dinner, and that can take a few hours, before our melatonin comes up. And there was a study that came out pretty recently of young people who were monitored for when they ate and when they slept, and when their melatonin came up, because there's a lot of variation on the exact timing of that. And it was found that there was, I think, a greater weight gain or difficulty losing weight in those people who were eating after their own melatonin had come up. So I think we don't have the best answer right now about when people should take melatonin, because you don't want to take it with your dinner, because that potentially could have a negative effect. So you want your digestion to clear for a few hours before taking the melatonin. And if you do take it, low dose is fine. It's sort of it's a what's called a flat dose response curve, meaning it doesn't matter how much you take, but taking more doesn't help. Taking 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 is not going to make you sleepier, because it's not a sleepy medication to begin with. It's simply a substance that is interacting with our melatonin receptors and helping to quiet down that arousal to allow our natural sleepiness process to take over.
I know you mentioned that eating a whole food plant-based diet, adequate exercise, sleeping to satiety was the trifecta for health. Some people tell me the only time they have to exercise is night. So I'm wondering, isn't night exercise often too stimulating? Because then these people find that then if they're exercising from 7 to 8 at night, then they get hungry and then they're eating late. So would it be, for those people, would it be better to exercise at night than not at all, even if it could potentially disrupt your sleep? Because I think sleep, for me, I value my sleep so much, Dr. Neubauer, that like if I'm having a party and it's 10 o'clock and you can stay, I'm going to bed, because I know for me, without sleeping to satiety, which is for me is always 7 to 8 hours, then I cannot practice the good eating and the good exercise. So so what would you say to somebody who says, oh, I have to, and they're taking these, I'm not talking about a gentle yoga class at night. They're doing their running, they're doing their CrossFit and their Zumba like 8 to 9 o'clock, and then they say, oh, but I had to eat, I was hungry, and then, you know.
Well, I think it backfires then if it's going to lead you to be eating more later into the evening. So usually that sort of advice I try to individualize as much as possible, and I think that some people are more sensitive to others, to the effects of exercise and how it's going to have a negative influence on their sleep. So I've talked to some people who do fine exercising 2 hours before bedtime. I've seen other people who, like 4 hours before bedtime, they still will have difficulty falling asleep. But I think you're exactly right that the earlier the better. So not exercising within a few hours of bedtime is good, even though it's admirable that the person wants to squeeze it in to their schedule. But it's very problematic then if that's going to have them eating more afterwards within a few hours of bedtime.
With all the states now legalizing marijuana, so many people are now saying that to help them sleep, they're vaping marijuana. It also helps with anxiety. What do you think about those things?
So we just don't know right now in terms of scientific evidence. I'm open-minded. Some patients come to see me and tell me that they sleep best with marijuana. I see plenty of others who say, I tried it because I was desperate and it didn't make any difference at all. There was a review paper that came out last year. The authors had analyzed all the available literature about the potential benefits or adverse effects of marijuana on sleep, and what they said was, we don't know. There's just not enough information to make any recommendations one way or another. I think we're going to find out quickly with the increased availability of marijuana and other cannabinoids, and it kind of makes sense that maybe they will help, but I think we just don't know yet.
Have you seen any? Have you seen any surprising lifestyle changes? Like somebody figured something out that was interfering with their sleep, and you're like, that's a new one by me. Can you think of some sort of like unusual lifestyle changes people can make that could help them?
Getting rid of their husband.
That's a good one.
So usually it's the synergy of several different things. I can tell you, one example that led to some improvement we talked about hydration, and so there was a woman who was avoiding drinking any fluids from early evening onwards, and then did a whole lot better. Now, she had lots of issues with her sleep, but this still made a significant difference.
Withholding fluid or
no, drinking. She'd been dehydrating herself
Mm-hmm.
because she was worried, I might have to get up and pee, and then my night will be ruined. And I think she realized that she could sleep better by being better hydrated into the evening.
Do you have any advice on jet lag? So I flew here from Los Angeles yesterday, so I couldn't fall asleep till 2 p.m. 2 a.m. your time because my body just couldn't fall asleep. So I still got my 8 hours, but I'm so tired today, and I'm normally not a person that walks around tired. How can we bounce back from jet lag, especially for those of us that travel frequently?
Yeah. So there's not a simple cure because it's an obvious problem of our physiological rhythms. Trying to adapt to the new photo period should help. Being active and exercising. You probably want to avoid the stimulants that might undermine your sleep afterwards.
Never take them.
She's so good.
So so sometimes the melatonin can help reestablish a pattern, but usually it's a matter of waiting it out and just making good decisions throughout the day and eating just right.
Right. How do you feel about naps?
So I have strong feelings about naps. Because sleep is a wonderful thing, and people should enjoy it when they can. And if I'm on an airplane, for instance, I'm likely to fall asleep, and because I'm probably a little sleep deprived as it is anyway. So naps can be helpful, if it's part of somebody's routine, it doesn't interfere with their ability to sleep at nighttime. If it's a power nap, if they get an energy boost, they're more productive for the rest of the day, that's okay. If people are napping, they should do it relatively early, like early afternoon, as opposed to later in the afternoon, because a later nap is more likely to interfere later. And the other thing is short. So 15, 20 minutes usually should be the maximum. And the reason is the longer people sleep, the more likely it is that they're going to shift into deeper stages of sleep. And so when people are in slow wave activity, possibly during a longer nap, then they can wake up feeling even worse. So you've probably talked to people who say, I don't nap because it makes me feel worse afterwards. So it's really good that we have slow wave sleep at nighttime, but we do that in the early part of the night and we recover from it later. And so let's say you go to bed and you're really deeply asleep and your phone goes off and you reach for like the remote control or the alarm clock, or it takes a while to get oriented again, and you might have a conversation and you might not even remember it the next day because our brain just doesn't switch gears out of slow wave activity very effectively. As opposed to later during the night, let's say you're in a dream and the phone goes off, well, you might incorporate that phone ringing into the dream, but you can usually wake up pretty fast and be alert and remember everything that's going on.
Wow.
So slow wave activity is really good. It has important physiologic roles. It has important roles for our memory, but it's a good thing that it's in the early part of our sleep so we can recover. So if you're taking a nap and you sleep a little too long and you have some of that slow wave sleep, you won't necessarily wake up feeling alert.
I have an acquaintance that actually sleepwalks and will eat and doesn't remember eating. What do you suggest to those people? Just lock the refrigerator at night?
Oh, people do all sorts of things. It's a true codable sleep disorder. It's a variant of sleepwalking, and there are some people who every single night get up and will let nothing get in their way of going to get food. Wow. Often they don't know about it. They may notice food is missing. They may notice empty packages and wrappers and crumbs the next day. Some people who have it really bad will try to eat things that are not meant to be eaten, like Brillo pads.
Oh,
they may try
high in fiber, though.
They may try to eat frozen foods right out of the freezer.
Do you see a lot of that? Because I've only known one person that has
Well,
it.
no, being a sleep disorder center, we get all sorts of strange things.
Can
Not real
people
common.
see you? Can people that live locally or are willing to travel actually come see you for a consult?
We see people from all over the world, mostly the Baltimore area, but people come from other states and sometimes from
Wow.
other
I know, I
countries to
send
get evaluations.
That's terrific.
I
We
have
have one more
for you
question.
about the body temperature,
Mhm.
and I've heard that it's better to be cooler in the evening. So are there strategies you can suggest? Like I've heard taking a warm bath,
Mhm.
drinking a hot cup of tea so your body's cooling off before you go to bed. And you've talked to me about using a fan at night.
Right. So there's an issue of the timing and the temperature, and so having your body temperature go up some, perhaps with a bath, maybe a shower, and then the downward slope as you're cooling may have a beneficial effect on sleep onset. But I think having a cool room is also a good idea. Most people sleep better when it's kind of cool as opposed to kind of warm. And so a fan is a good idea. I'm also an advocate of regulating the noise. So usually when you see sleep hygiene advice, it's sleep in a dark room, and pretty dark, as dark as you can get while being safe is a good idea. And a quiet room. But for some people, quiet is just
Not happening in LA. That's
too
why.
well. There's that, but
Moving.
also if you have insomnia and it's quiet and you start to listen for things and you start to pay attention to all of that. So I'm an advocate of some variant of white noise, some background noise. Not the television, not the radio, not music, because our brains pay attention to those, but sort of background white noise. And some of the devices that are available right now, like one that I have right next to my bed, it just has a really comforting kind of sound. Now, people also may use a fan, and that's good because ventilation is good, feeling kind of cool is good, and some fans have really good sounds to them. I would suggest auditioning them to make sure you don't have one that's got a really annoying sound. But I am a fan of fans.
A fan of fans. I find that
in
if
the
I have
bedroom.
trouble sleeping, I put on a YouTube of one of my favorite plant-based doctors who will be nameless, and that puts me right to sleep. Last question, Dr. Neubauer. A lot of people, they fall asleep on time, they sleep well, but they wake up maybe because they had a pee or whatever, and then they can't get back to sleep.
Right.
What do you do for them? What should they be doing?
Yeah. So that is the number one complaint. When people have insomnia, while getting to sleep may be a problem, staying asleep is the bigger problem. And you ought to be able to get up and go pee and get back to bed. Unless it's maybe 5 a.m. But if it's several hours earlier, you should be able to get back to sleep again. Some people are waking up during the night because they have sleep apnea that they don't know about. So that's one thing we would worry about. We look into all of those behaviors that people are following, and maybe they had caffeine too late, and even though they could fall asleep, it's keeping their sleep lighter during the nighttime. Some people have a biological clock that is sort of shifted really earlier. There's something called an advanced sleep phase syndrome that may cause some people to just habitually wake up way too early. What to do? All the things we talked about. Having a cool room and background noise, and keep it relatively dark, and moderate your fluids, not too much, but definitely not too little. Make sure it's been a long time since you ate.
Yeah, thank you so much. You have just been such a wealth of knowledge and information. Thank you so much, Dr. Neubauer. This is amazing. Thank you guys for watching.